If you take the cellular DNA, like the literal biological blueprint of a Punjabi wheat farmer living in modern-day Pakistan, and you compare it to the genetic code of a Tamil software engineer living thousands of miles away in southern India, geneticists will tell you they are built from the exact same three ancient ingredients.
Right, they are deeply interconnected cousins, biologically speaking.
Exactly. And yet, less than 80 years ago, a British lawyer who had never been east of Paris in his entire life sat in a sweltering room, drew a line on a map, and essentially convinced the world that these people were fundamental, irreconcilable enemies.
It's just one of the most profound geopolitical paradoxes of the modern era. I mean, we place so much trust in the solid black lines we see on modern maps.
We really do. We just assume that if there is a border, there has to be some fundamental biological or historical difference between the people on either side of it.
Yeah, but when you apply the lens of modern genetic genealogy to the Indian subcontinent, that comforting illusion of neat categorization just, well, it completely shatters.
It shatters into a billion pieces, and that is exactly why we are here. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to look at this staggering stack of historical records, archaeological reports, and, cutting-edge genetic sequencing data.
We want to give you a shortcut to deeply understanding a region that quite literally shapes global culture and geopolitics.
We are unpacking the grand history, the complex ethnic heritage, and the literal genetic blueprints of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Because we get so many questions about this, people look at modern headlines and they want to know, are these populations actually related?
Right, like, are they closer to Middle Eastern populations or East Asian ones?
Yeah.
And crucially, how did they become so deeply divided?
Exactly. So to answer that, we have to bypass the modern political textbooks and literally look at the cellular blueprints.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because my initial thought, just looking at a globe, is completely driven by modern geography.
Sure, geography implies destiny, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Pakistan borders Iran and Afghanistan, common sense suggests the people there are essentially Middle Eastern or Central Asian, and Bangladesh is nestled right up against Myanmar, so you'd assume they lean heavily toward Southeast Asian ancestry.
With India just being this giant landmass caught in the middle.
Right. But our sources are really emphatic on this point. Genetic science looks at those geographical assumptions and throws them completely out the window.
It really does. When you strip away the modern flags, the vast majority of people across India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh share a highly unique, deeply unified ancestral genetic recipe.
So let's break down this recipe. If I'm looking at the genetic foundation of this entire subcontinent, what are those building blocks? What are those three ancient ingredients?
Well, the first group, representing the deepest, oldest root of the family tree, is known as the ancient ancestral South Indians, or AASI.
The AASI. Got it.
Yeah, these were indigenous hunter-gatherers who thrived in the region for tens of thousands of years before anyone else even arrived.
Tens of thousands of years.
Exactly. And their DNA is spectacular to researchers because it's incredibly distinct. You don't find this specific genetic signature naturally occurring anywhere else on Earth. It is the absolute bedrock of the subcontinent.
Okay, so that's our foundation. Deep, localized roots. But wait, before we add the other two ingredients, I actually have a logistical question.
Sure, go ahead.
How do we actually know this? Because the subcontinent is notoriously hot, humid, and prone to heavy monsoons. I always thought heat and humidity absolutely destroyed ancient DNA.
Oh, they do. You hit on the central hurdle of ancient genomics right there.
So how are scientists extracting genetic code from tens of thousands of years ago in that climate?
For a long time, the heat actually did prevent us from knowing this. Biological matter degrades so rapidly in the tropics. But the breakthrough came relatively recently, and it involves this very specific, tiny part of the human skull called the petrous bone.
The petrous bone. I've never heard of that.
It's this pyramid-shaped bone located right at the base of the skull, and it houses the inner ear. It is incredibly dense. In fact, it is the hardest bone in the mammalian body.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and because of its density, it acts like a microscopic biological vault. It protects trace amounts of ancient DNA from heat, from moisture, and bacterial decay long after the rest of the skeleton has completely turned to dust.
That is incredible. A microscopic vault in the inner ear holding the secrets of an entire civilization. So they crack that open and find the AASI. Who unlocks the door next?
The second wave arrives roughly 10,000 to 7,000 years ago. These are the Iranian agriculturalists.
Okay, ancient farmers.
Yes, ancient farmers from the Iranian plateau who began migrating eastward, moving down into the Indus Valley. But what's critical here is how they arrived.
They weren't an invading army, right?
No, not at all. They didn't arrive as conquerors wiping out the locals. They brought these revolutionary farming techniques, specifically wheat and barley cultivation, and they just mixed extensively with the local ASI, hunter-gatherers.
And when you combine a stable, predictable food supply with an established local population, you get a colossal population boom.
Yeah.
That's the spark for early civilization.
Precisely. Then, the third major ingredient enters the picture much later, around 2000 to 1500 BCE. And these are the steppe pastoralists.
The nomads from the north.
Right. They were nomadic herders originating in the vast Eurasian steppes up around modern-day Russia and Kazakhstan. They migrated southward, bringing horses, early wheeled vehicles, and early Indo-European languages.
And they just layered their DNA into this already established AAS and Iranian mixing bowl.
Exactly. Everyone carries these three foundational ancestors.
You know, it's like baking a cake. You have flour, sugar, and butter. A Punjabi person from Lahore and a Tamil person from Chennai are made of the exact same three ingredients.
That's a great analogy.
Just in the slightly different measurements, right? Like, depending on the region.
Yes, only the proportions change based on geography. So in modern-day Pakistan and northern India, the genetic mix generally shows a higher percentage of steppe and Iranian farmer DNA.
And as you move south,
As you move geographically south into the Indian peninsula, you see a much higher percentage of the indigenous ASI DNA. But the fundamental cake remains the exact same.
this brings me back to the global question, though. If we have to place South Asians on a broader human family tree, where do they sit? Are they East Asian, Middle Eastern?
Genetically, they are considered a completely distinct standalone cluster. They're their own unique family. But if we look at the origins of those building blocks, the Iranian agriculturalists and the steppe pastoralists are classified as West Eurasian lineages.
Oh, I see.
So because of that, South Asians are genetically much closer to Middle Eastern, Central Asian, and European populations than they are to East Asian populations like the Chinese.
Okay, but our sources noted a really fascinating exception here, specifically regarding Bangladesh and Northeast India. A Bengali person from Dhaka just has some extra sprinkles on top of that cake, don't they?
They do, yeah. Geography always leaves a fingerprint. Because Bangladesh and Northeast India sit right at the crossroads of Southeast Asia, their populations experienced localized mixing over the last few millennia with Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic groups.
So it's the exact same foundational cake, the AASI, Iranian, and steppe DNA, just with a sprinkle of East Asian ancestry.
Exactly. It beautifully reflects the physical journey of the land. But, while genes provide the blueprint, it was the actual actions of those people that built the physical foundation of their shared history.
Yeah, the biology is undisputed. But what fascinates me is what those people actually built. Yeah. Because the ASI and the Iranian agriculturalists didn't just sit around blending their DNA.
They certainly didn't.
They built one of the most advanced ancient societies on Earth.
We are stepping into the Indus Valley civilization now, also known as the Harappan culture. We're traveling back to roughly 2500 BCE.
Just to give you some global context, this is an era where Europe is still largely tribal and just navigating the Bronze Age.
Right. The Great Pyramid of Giza is just being finished in Egypt.
And meanwhile, in the Indian subcontinent, they're building something that completely defies my understanding of the ancient world. The geographical spread alone is just staggering.
It covered what is today almost all of Pakistan, parts of northwest India, and even stretched all the way into Afghanistan. It was the largest of the three ancient cradles of civilization.
Larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Yes, surpassing both in pure territorial size. But the size isn't even what astounds archaeologists the most. It's the obsessive, almost modern level of civic engineering.
Grid systems, right?
Yes. If you were to walk into an ancient city like Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, you wouldn't see chaotic clusters of mud huts organically sprawling outward. You would see meticulously planned cities laid out on a rigid, perfect grid.
Like Manhattan, but 4,500 years ago. That is wild. And it wasn't just the street layout. The sources mentioned the literal mud bricks used to build these massive cities were standardized across thousands of miles.
The standardization is a marvel of ancient bureaucracy. Whether you are in a city in modern-day Sindh in Pakistan or Gujarat in India, The baked mud bricks used for construction followed an exact 4:2:1 ratio in terms of length, width, and thickness.
That implies a highly sophisticated centralized system of weights and measures, right?
Exactly. Quality control that stretched across a colossal empire.
But the detail that absolutely stops me in my tracks, the thing I need us to spend a moment on, is the plumbing.
Oh, the indoor plumbing is legendary.
Because when I think of ancient cities, I think of open sewers and filth. But the Indus Valley people had indoor plumbing centuries before Western Europe.
Their hydraulic engineering was totally unparalleled. The streets were lined with covered, highly sophisticated drainage systems built from those exact standardized bricks.
And private bathrooms.
Yes, nearly every single private house had its own designated bathing area. The wastewater from the house would flow into small sump pots that caught solid waste, while the liquid waste flowed out into the main street drains.
I am completely obsessed with this fact. They had private bathrooms and functioning underground sewers centuries before Western Europe even grasped the concept of not throwing chamber pots out the window.
It shows a profound level of civic dignity and organization.
And the people engineering these sump pots and laying these perfectly aligned streets were that exact genetic blend of ASI hunter-gatherers and Iranian farmers. Which means this incredibly advanced cultural bedrock belongs equally to the modern people of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh.
It is entirely their shared heritage. But, as we know, even the most brilliantly engineered cities are at the mercy of the planet.
Right.
Around 1900 BCE, this incredible urban network began to rapidly decline and empty out.
Now, when I learned about this years ago, the prevailing textbook theory was the Aryan invasion. The idea that those steppe pastoralists arrived on horseback and violently slaughtered the Indus Valley people.
Right, that theory dominated historical discourse for decades. But modern archaeology and advanced climate science have thoroughly debunked it.
Oh, really?
Yes. We've found no archaeological evidence of massive citywide slaughters, no burned layers of destruction in the soil. The real culprit was actually far more insidious. It was climate change.
The monsoons shifted.
Exactly. The monsoon pattern shifted dramatically, and tectonic activity in the Himalayas may have also played a role in altering river courses. Major rivers like the historically legendary Sarasvati River began to literally dry up.
And since the Indus Valley civilization was an agricultural superpower, without predictable water, maintaining these incredibly dense urban centers just became mathematically impossible.
They literally couldn't feed themselves anymore.
So they couldn't stay. Where did they go?
They packed up their culture, their weights and measures, their spiritual symbols, and they migrated. They moved eastward toward the incredibly fertile Ganges River Basin, which encompasses modern North India and Bangladesh.
And they pushed southward too, right?
Yes, into the Indian Peninsula. And as they dispersed, they blended their advanced culture and their DNA with the local populations they encountered,
creating this wave of cultural continuity sweeping across the whole region. And as they are moving, this is when our third genetic ingredient, the steppe pastoralists, finally arrive, bringing those early Indo-European languages.
This marks the beginning of the Vedic period, roughly 1500 to 1000 BCE.
This is a monumental era. It's the era that sees the composition of the Vedas, the foundational sacred texts of Hinduism.
Right. Now, as society during this time began organizing itself, it formed different occupational classes, but initially the genetic data reveals something really crucial. The society was incredibly flexible.
Flexible meaning people were constantly mixing, like intermarriage.
Yes. The genetic record from this specific period shows widespread, continuous intermarriage happening across almost every group in the subcontinent. The AASI descendants, the Iranian farmer descendants, and the newly arrived steppe descendants were all freely mixing.
Just a dynamic, spinning genetic blender.
But then the blender abruptly loses power. It just stops.
Yeah, our sources note that around 2,000 years ago, during the classical imperial eras, this fluid occupational system mutated into something incredibly rigid. The caste system became strictly hereditary.
And this introduces the mechanism of endogamy.
Let's define that for a second.
Endogamy is the strict cultural and legal practice of marrying only within a specific local group, caste, or micro-community, and fundamentally rejecting anyone outside of it as an unsuitable match.
Now, I have to challenge this premise because it sounds like science fiction to me. I mean, I understand that human beings create brutal social classes.
Sure.
But to say that a socially constructed rule actually altered the biological evolution and genetic mixing of an entire subcontinent? How could any society possibly enforce a marriage rule so strictly that it permanently traps DNA in a time capsule?
What's fascinating here is that it challenges our modern understanding of social compliance. You have to consider the mechanics of social ostracization in an ancient agrarian society.
Right, it's not like getting canceled on the internet today.
Not at all. If you married outside your specific subcaste or jati, you weren't just frowned upon, you were often entirely exiled from your community network.
Okay.
And in a world where your community provided your physical safety, your economic livelihood, and your religious salvation, exile was effectively a death sentence. The social enforcement was absolute.
So basically, human social rules acted like a pause button on human evolution. The fear of exile was stronger than the natural human impulse to mix.
Exactly. Because these strict rules of endogamy were adhered to relentlessly for nearly 2,000 years, or roughly 80 to 100 generations, population groups essentially froze their genetic code.
We literally trapped our DNA in a time capsule using social class. That is staggering.
It's unparalleled in human history on this demographic scale. Today, a geneticist can walk into a rural village in modern India or Pakistan and take DNA samples from two different communities living side by side.
In the exact same village.
In the exact same village. They might share the same well, speak the same local dialect, and eat the exact same food. Yet, genetically, they look like entirely distinct populations.
Because their ancestors strictly adhered to these endogamy rules for 80 generations.
Yes. They lived next door to each other for 2 millennia and never once intermarried. The subcontinent became a massive tapestry of thousands of locked genetic vaults.
So the biology freezes at the micro level. But while the genetics froze, the broader culture was about to be tossed into a massive blender by a series of world-altering empires. We have a 2,500-year gap between the Vedic period and the global image of South Asia we recognize today.
Right. How did the region unify politically?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Through a series of sweeping, colossal empires that continuously bound the lands of modern Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh under single administrative umbrellas. The first truly massive unifier was the Mauryan Empire, peaking around 250 BCE under Emperor Ashoka the Great.
I want to spend a second on Ashoka, because the logistical reality of his empire is wild. He ruled over almost the entirety of the subcontinent. How do you even communicate your laws across that much land before paper or the postal service?
You carve them into the landscape itself.
Literally.
Yes, Ashoka erected these massive stone pillars, some standing 50 feet tall and weighing 50 tons, across his entire empire. He inscribed them with his edicts, which, after his conversion to Buddhism, heavily promoted peace, religious tolerance, and animal welfare.
The fascinating part is the geographic spread. Archaeologists have found these identical Mauryan pillars standing in modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, all the way across to the borders of modern-day Bangladesh.
It served as a physical stone-carved spine connecting the region, and then jumping forward to around 300 to 500 CE, we see the rise of the Gupta Empire.
The Golden Age, right?
Universally recognized by historians as the golden age of classical Indian civilization. It was an era of profound intellectual flourishing in science, art, and mathematics.
This is the era where mathematicians calculated the solar year to an incredibly precise degree and, crucially, developed the concept of zero.
Which is something we completely take for granted today.
We totally do.
Yeah.
But before the Gupta mathematicians developed the decimal place value system with zero as an independent numerical value, complex mathematics were extraordinarily cumbersome.
Try doing advanced algebra using Roman numerals.
Exactly. You can't. The invention of zero revolutionized global mathematics, and it was born from this shared, unified regional intellect.
It's an incredible legacy. But if we want to talk about the era that forged the iconic, vibrant aesthetic that the entire globe immediately associates with South Asia today, we have to move forward to the 1500s.
We have to talk about the Mughals.
Yes, the Mughal Empire completely rewired the cultural DNA of the subcontinent. The Mughals were Central Asian royalty, tracing their bloodlines directly back to conquerors like Genghis Khan and Timur.
They swept down through the mountain passes of Afghanistan, right?
Yes, the founder, Babur, initiated a conquest that would eventually blanket all three modern nations.
Now, historically, when a massive foreign military conquers a vastly different region, the playbook is pretty brutal and predictable. The conquerors usually extract the wealth, crush the local culture, and force everyone to adopt their ways.
Usually, yes.
But the Mughals operated completely differently, didn't they?
That is the core of their legacy. The Mughals, despite beginning as conquerors, quickly realized that the key to ruling this massive, diverse region was synthesis, not erasure.
Cultural fusion.
Exactly. They brought with them a profound, almost obsessive love for Persian aesthetics, Persian poetry, Persian gardens, Central Asian architecture. But instead of bulldozing the local traditions, they deliberately, artistically fused the two worlds together.
They created a high-budget imperial mashup.
A magnificent fusion that historians call the Indo-Islamic or Persianate culture. And this synthesis reshaped the physical and daily reality of the region in ways that completely ignore modern borders.
Let's look at the architecture for a second. I have to admit something to you. For my entire life, when I saw pictures of those sweeping, majestic domes and incredibly intricate archways, I just assumed, oh, that is what ancient Indian architecture looks like.
Most people do.
But it's actually a total blend, isn't it?
It is. The Mughals took the sweeping, bulbous Islamic domes and the soaring vaulted archways of their Central Asian heritage, and they married them to the traditional elements of the subcontinent.
Like the red sandstone.
Yes, they incorporated indigenous lotus motifs, heavy stone brackets, traditional chatras, those small umbrella-like pavilions, and they built it all using the striking local red sandstone and white marble.
And the result of that architectural marriage is staggering. You get absolute masterpieces. But the geographical spread is what proves our point today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the Taj Mahal, perhaps the most famous building on Earth, is in Agra, India. The colossal, breathtaking Badshahi Mosque is in Lahore, Pakistan. And the Lal Ba Fort is in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
And if you look at high-resolution photos of these three monuments side by side, they speak the exact same architectural language.
They're clearly born from the exact same imperial mind.
And the visual arts and music followed the exact same path. Classical music evolved into what we know as the Hindustani style.
Which is another mashup, right?
Yes, the royal courts took ancient, complex Hindu temple ragas and seamlessly blended them with Persian instruments that the Mughals carried over, such as the sitar and the tabla.
It even unified fashion. The elegant, high-collared sherwani, the flowing shalwar kameez that you see worn across the entire region today, those are direct descendants of Mughal courtly attire.
They are.
But of all the fusions, my absolute favorite, and the one that physically impacts my life on a regular basis, is the food.
The culinary legacy of the Mughal Empire is arguably its most enduring and universally beloved triumph.
Let's look at the mechanics of this culinary collision, because if you love rich, aromatic, deeply complex food, you owe a massive debt to the Mughal kitchens. How did this fusion actually work on a stove?
Well, the Mughals brought with them Persian culinary techniques, specifically the love for rich meats, the use of nuts and dried fruits in savory dishes, and the dum pukt method.
Dum pukt, that's the slow cooking method.
Right. It involves slow cooking meat and rice in heavily sealed pots over a low fire. But Persian food was traditionally quite mild in its spice profile.
And then they arrived in Hindustan, which is the undisputed spice capital of the globe.
Exactly. The royal chefs took those slow-cooking Persian meat techniques and violently collided them with the intense, vibrant, local flavors of the subcontinent.
We're talking black cardamom, cloves, turmeric, cumin, fiery chilies.
And that collision birthed the absolute titans of South Asian cuisine: biryani, rich, slow-simmered kormas, Sikh kebabs.
And the beauty of this is, it completely transcends modern politics. It doesn't matter if you are sitting at a street food stall in Karachi, Pakistan, ordering a kebab, or eating an incredibly rich mutton biryani in Kolkata, India, or a perfectly spiced kachi biryani in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
You are eating the exact same historical legacy. The palates of those three countries are intimately, historically tethered together.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If we're talking about profound synthesis, we have to examine the linguistic evolution.
Yes. The Mughal era birthed an entirely new, deeply poetic language to serve this fused society.
Urdu. This is the part I find endlessly fascinating. Because languages usually evolve at a glacial pace over thousands of years. But Urdu seems to have evolved almost out of immediate practical necessity.
It was a linguistic necessity born in the military camps known as Urdu in Turkish, which gives the language its name, and the bustling merchant markets of Delhi.
Right, because you had Central Asian soldiers, Persian-speaking nobility, and local merchants who all desperately needed to communicate just to run the empire.
Exactly.
I love thinking about this process like the ultimate open-source software collaboration.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy. How so?
Well, the local population provided the Hindi and Prakrit grammar. The grammar is the operating system, right? It dictates how the sentences actually function, the verbs, the syntax.
Right.
And once that operating system was established, the Mughals downloaded these colossal vocabulary expansion packs from Persian, Arabic, and Turkish and installed them directly into the Hindi framework.
That perfectly describes the mechanics of the language. The structural skeleton remains deeply indigenous, but the flesh of the language, the vocabulary, becomes heavily Persianized.
And the legacy of this open source project is incredibly prominent today. Urdu is the national language of Pakistan, and Hindi is the most widely spoken language in India.
Yet, if a tourist from Lahore, Pakistan, and a tourist from Delhi, India, bump into each other at a coffee shop in London, they don't need a translator.
Not for conversational speech, right?
Yeah, not at all. They are mutually intelligible. A Hindi speaker might use more Sanskrit-derived nouns, and an Urdu speaker might use more Persian-derived nouns. But the verbs, the structure, the conversational flow, they are two sides of the same linguistic coin, minted in those Delhi camps.
It's genuinely beautiful when you zoom out. You have this sweeping region sharing the exact same genetic ledger, the same ancient buried cities, they're the same locked genetic micropopulations. And now, unified by the Mughals, they share the same breathtaking architecture, the same slow-cooked cuisine, and mutually intelligible languages.
It was an intricately woven, immensely wealthy tapestry.
It was. But immense wealth and deep, intricate complexity often attract predators.
Unfortunately, yes. This interconnectedness was the region's greatest cultural strength, but it became its fatal vulnerability when a highly calculating outsider arrived, looking to dismantle the society for profit by deliberately unpicking those very seams.
We're entering the 1600s, and a totally new, highly corporate player enters the historical chat, the British East India Company.
It is vital to understand the mechanics of their arrival. The British did not arrive with a massive armada, declaring a sweeping war against the Mughal emperor.
That would have been suicide, right? The Mughal Empire was far too wealthy and powerful.
Exactly. They arrived as men in suits. They were businessmen, stockholders, representing a joint stock company looking to secure lucrative trade monopolies on spices, tea, and the region's world-renowned textiles.
They arrived for commerce. But as the Mughal Empire slowly began to decentralize and fracture into regional kingdoms over the following centuries, the British East India Company transitioned from trading to dominating.
They looked at the vast landscape, teeming with diverse religious groups, local nawabs, and Hindu maharajas, and realized a fundamental truth of conquest.
You cannot subjugate a massive, unified population with a tiny handful of colonial administrators.
Precisely. You simply don't have the manpower. So they implemented a deeply insidious, highly effective mechanism of control known as divide and rule.
And the strategy was simple. To maintain power, you must ensure the local population fears each other more than they resent you.
That's it. Exactly.
But how do they actually mechanize that on the ground?
Yeah.
How do you force people who have coexisted for centuries to suddenly turn on each other?
Through calculated political and financial manipulation. Let's say a local Hindu king was consolidating power and showing signs of independence from British trade demands.
The British wouldn't just attack him directly.
No, the British colonial officers would quietly approach his neighboring Muslim rival. They would stoke historical grievances, provide British funding, supply modern weaponry, and actively push them into a military conflict.
Wow.
And conversely, if a Muslim ruler became a threat, they armed his Hindu neighbor.
They turned a naturally diverse cultural landscape into a heavily armed, deeply paranoid chessboard.
And this manipulation eventually led to a breaking point. By 1857, the East India Company had mismanaged and exploited the land so ruthlessly that a colossal, bloody rebellion broke out across the subcontinent.
And the situation spirals completely out of the company's control.
Completely. The British government back in London was forced to intervene, dissolve the East India Company's rule, and establish direct, formal imperial control known as the British Raj.
So now, the British Crown is officially ruling over this massive territory encompassing modern Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh as one giant administrative unit.
And during this near century of direct rule, they institutionalized the divide and rule mentality into the literal bureaucracy of the state. They began categorizing people strictly by religion in their official census data.
And they instituted separate voting electorates.
Right.
Yes, meaning Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates and Hindus for Hindu candidates.
That is a terrifying mechanism.
Yeah.
They took religion, which had historically been a fluid, personal, or community-based spiritual identity, and forged it into a hard, unyielding political border.
They trained the population to view their neighbors primarily as political rivals for limited colonial resources.
They systematically destroyed the trust that the Mughals and previous empires had fostered. And this engineered paranoia sets the stage for the ultimate catastrophe when the British finally realized their empire was collapsing.
Right. We jump forward to the late 1940s. The global landscape has completely shifted. World War II has just concluded.
Britain's cities are bombed out, their treasury is functionally bankrupt, and they are militarily exhausted.
Simultaneously, the people of the subcontinent have spent decades organizing an unstoppable, brilliant, multi-layered independence movement.
You have towering figures like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah mobilizing hundreds of millions of people.
The British establishment looks at the economics and the sheer scale of the unrest and realizes the era of the Raj is over. They must leave.
But exiting isn't simple. You can't just hand the keys back, because those decades of the divide and rule strategy have resulted in a political landscape devoid of trust.
The leaders of the independence movement found themselves at a tragic impasse regarding how a newly free nation should be governed.
Right. The Indian National Congress, representing the Hindu majority, envisioned a unified, centralized, secular state encompassing the entire subcontinent.
But the Muslim minority, politically represented by the Muslim League and spearheaded by Jinnah, looked at the demographic math and those deeply entrenched colonial divisions, and they felt a profound existential anxiety.
They feared that in a unified democracy, Muslims would be permanently outvoted, relegated to second-class citizenry, and politically erased.
Exactly. Driven by this fear, the Muslim League aggressively demanded a separate, sovereign homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent, a concept they named Pakistan.
The political rhetoric is just boiling over at this point. Riots are erupting in major cities like Calcutta, the streets are thick with fear, and then the last British viceroy, Lord Louis Mountbatten, arrives to oversee the transition.
And he looks at the spiraling violence and essentially throws his hands up in panic. Mountbatten concluded that a peaceful, unified handover was politically impossible and that civil war was imminent.
So to extricate Britain from the impending chaos, he makes a fateful decision. He would partition the subcontinent.
And worse, he drastically accelerated the timeline. Instead of a gradual, managed transition over years, he gave the region mere months to untangle millennia of deeply interwoven history.
And to execute this monumental task, to literally slice a massive ancient civilization in half, the British government appoints a man named Cyril Radcliffe.
Cyril Radcliffe was a highly respected, brilliant legal mind working in London, but his selection for this specific task is widely considered one of the most baffling, arrogant decisions in colonial history.
I want you, the listener, to really process this detail because it sounds like a dark comedy. This man is tasked with drawing the borders of two new sovereign nations, deciding the fate of hundreds of millions of people. And he had never been east of Paris.
Never. He had absolutely zero firsthand geographic, cultural, or logistical knowledge of South Asia. He didn't know how the local agricultural economies function. He didn't understand the complex, interwoven demographic reality of the rural villages.
He flies into Delhi in July. They place him in a sweltering, unair-conditioned room. They hand him a stack of outdated colonial maps, some deeply flawed census data, and they give him roughly 5 weeks to draw the lines that will define the modern geopolitical landscape.
5 weeks, and the lines he drew, which became known as the Radcliffe Line, were an unmitigated disaster.
What did he actually do?
To create this new Muslim-majority nation of Pakistan, he took a pen to the two most prosperous, culturally cohesive, and economically integrated provinces of the empire, Punjab in the west and Bengal in the east, and he quite literally sliced them down the middle.
He wasn't drawing lines through empty deserts. He was drawing borders through densely populated neighborhoods, through active agricultural irrigation networks.
Yes, and in several documented instances, his pen line went directly through the middle of people's homes. Families literally realized their kitchen was legally in one country and their bedroom was in a hostile foreign nation.
It was bureaucratic butchery. But the macro-level geographic outcome of the Radcliffe Line was even more baffling, because the Muslim-majority demographics were heavily concentrated on the extreme western flank and the extreme eastern flank of the subcontinent.
Right, which meant Radcliffe created a single sovereign nation, Pakistan, that existed in two entirely disconnected halves.
Let's pause and ground this in modern reality, because the sheer logistical absurdity of this map is hard to swallow. They created a single country, But you have West Pakistan bordering the mountains of Afghanistan, and you have East Pakistan nestled in the tropical deltas near Myanmar.
Yes.
And physically separating these two halves of the same country is 1,000 miles of a completely different, newly sovereign and highly suspicious nation, India.
That was the official border.
Wait, so that's like declaring that New York and Los Angeles are one single country, but the entire Midwest, the Rocky Mountains and everything in between, belongs to a sovereign Canada.
Yeah.
How is that ever going to work? How do you govern a population separated by 1,000 miles of foreign soil? How do you move military forces? How do you trade goods?
Spoilers, you don't. It was a geographic and political impossibility. It was doomed from the moment Radcliffe put his pen down.
Yeah.
But the long-term political failure was immediately overshadowed by the immediate human catastrophe of the borders being announced.
And the timing of that announcement was brutally cynical. The borders were officially released to the public on August 17, 1947. That is 2 days after both India and Pakistan had celebrated their official independence days.
Millions of people celebrated their newfound freedom on August 15th without actually knowing which country they were legally standing in.
That's insane.
When Radcliffe's maps were finally published and printed in the local papers, absolute chaos gripped the subcontinent.
Millions of people woke up, looked at the map, and realized they were suddenly on the wrong side of a freshly drawn religious divide.
If you were a Hindu family whose ancestors had lived in Lahore for centuries, you were suddenly trapped in the newly declared Islamic Republic of Pakistan. If you were a Muslim family in Delhi, you were suddenly surrounded by the Hindu-majority state of India.
The resulting panic triggered the Great Partition. It remains one of the largest, most sudden, and most devastating mass human migrations in recorded history. Over 15 million people abandoned their ancestral homes, packing whatever they could carry on their backs or load onto wooden carts, and fled toward the borders.
And you have to imagine the logistics. 15 million people moving simultaneously without an organized train system, without international aid, and crucially, without military protection. Because Mountbatten had rushed the exit, the British essentially washed their hands of the security situation.
And this is where the century of colonial psychological manipulation finally bore its darkest fruit.
It did. Because the population had been trained to view religious identity as a weapon and a political threat, that weapon discharged.
Neighbors who had lived peacefully side by side for generations, whose ancestors, as we established, shared the exact same ASI and step genetic DNA, suddenly turned on each other in an explosion of apocalyptic violence.
The accounts from our sources are harrowing. Desperate columns of refugees, miles long, were ambushed on the roads. Trains pulling into stations in Punjab were completely silent because every single passenger had been slaughtered during the journey.
Women were abducted by the tens of thousands. Entire ancestral villages were reduced to ash. It is conservatively estimated that between 1 and 2 million innocent people lost their lives in a matter of weeks.
It is a staggering number. The trauma of the Great Partition fundamentally fractured the psyche of the subcontinent, turning a fluid, shared cultural identity into a hard, violent political border left deep intergenerational scars.
It's the defining tragedy that dictates the heavily militarized geopolitical reality of India and Pakistan today.
Absolutely.
So the British flee the scene, the borders are cemented in profound bloodshed, and the dust slightly settles. We are left with India holding the center, and this bizarre two-part nation of Pakistan clinging to the western and eastern edges.
And as we pointed out earlier, a country split by 1,000 miles of foreign territory is a political impossibility.
Which brings us to the final sweeping transformation in this regional saga, the disintegration of the two-part Pakistan and the fiery birth of Bangladesh.
We have to examine why this failed so spectacularly. The foundational concept of Pakistan was that the shared religion of Islam would act as a powerful enough glue to bind West Pakistan and East Pakistan together.
But if we examine the mechanics of human identity, we see a glaring flaw in that theory. Shared faith is a powerful bond, yes, but it cannot completely override the 1,000-mile physical void, nor can it erase profound cultural, linguistic, and economic differences.
Because beyond religion, West and East Pakistan had literally nothing in common.
Let's look at the geography and diet. West Pakistan, modern-day Pakistan, is defined by arid deserts, the rugged mountains of the Hindu Kush, and a wheat-based agricultural diet heavily influenced by Central Asian traditions. Think naan, heavy meats, and kebabs.
Conversely, East Pakistan, modern-day Bangladesh, is a lush, intensely green, tropical river delta defined by heavy monsoons and massive waterways. Their diet and lifestyle were intrinsically tied to the delta: rice, fish, and tropical agriculture.
But the most vital immediate divide was linguistic. West Pakistan was a mosaic of distinct languages like Punjabi, Sindhi, and Pashto, but the political elite promoted Urdu.
Right. East Pakistan, however, spoke Bengali. And Bengali isn't just a dialect. It is an ancient language with an incredibly rich literary tradition, fiercely proud poets, and a deep cultural footprint.
So you have two completely distinct cultures forced into a single political marriage.
And from the very inception of the state, the power dynamics of that marriage were deeply toxic and profoundly unequal. The federal government, the military headquarters, the political elite, and the economic capital were all heavily centralized in West Pakistan.
They held all the cards. And according to the economic data in our sources, they essentially treated East Pakistan not as a co-equal state, but as a subordinate, resource-rich colony.
The economic disparity is shocking in retrospect. East Pakistan, through its massive export of jute, a fiber used to make burlap and rope, which was in huge global demand, was generating the vast majority of the entire country's foreign wealth.
They were the economic engine.
They were. Yet, the central government took that revenue and funneled it almost exclusively into building up the military and infrastructure of West Pakistan. The East saw virtually none of the wealth they were producing.
And beyond the economic theft, there was this toxic cultural arrogance. The ruling elite in the West actively looked down on the Bengali culture of the East.
Right, because Bengali culture shared linguistic and literary roots with the Bengali population living across the border in India. The West Pakistani elite viewed the East as too Indian or insufficiently Islamic.
This profound cultural disrespect reached a boiling point almost immediately. In 1948, just a year after the traumatic partition, the revered founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, traveled to Dhaka in East Pakistan.
He stood before a massive crowd of proud Bengali students and intellectuals, and he unilaterally declared that Urdu, and only Urdu, would be the official state language of the entire nation.
Think about the arrogance of that moment. The Bengali people constituted the demographic majority of the entire country of Pakistan, and the central government is telling them that their ancient, beautiful mother tongue is legally invalid in the eyes of the state.
The Bengali response was fierce and immediate. They refused to accept linguistic erasure. This sparked the historic language movement.
Students at Dhaka University and intellectuals across the East began organizing mass protests, demanding that Bengali be recognized as a co-equal state language alongside Urdu.
And I want to clarify, these protests were completely peaceful.
They were students marching for linguistic rights.
They were entirely peaceful, but the state's response was brutal. On February 21st, 1952, during a massive demonstration in Dhaka, the police opened fire on the unarmed student protesters.
Several young men were shot and killed in the street. They were murdered simply for demanding the legal right to speak the language of their ancestors.
The shock and profound grief of those killings galvanized East Pakistan. Those students instantly became national martyrs. The blood spilled on February 21st fundamentally shifted the Bengali mindset from demanding linguistic rights to demanding political autonomy.
It's such a pivotal moment in human history that today, the United Nations UNESCO officially commemorates February 21st globally as International Mother Language Day, directly honoring the sacrifice of those Bengali students.
So the seeds of separation are deeply planted in 1952. For the next 2 decades, this tension simmers. The West gets richer, the East remains economically starved, and the cultural alienation becomes a chasm.
The absolute irrevocable breaking point finally arrives in 1970, and it is triggered by an event entirely outside of human control, a catastrophic natural disaster.
A massive tropical system, Cyclone Bola, made landfall on the coast of East Pakistan. The storm surge was apocalyptic.
It remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded human history, wiping out entire islands and coastal villages in a matter of hours. The numbers in our sources are horrifying. An estimated 500,000 people died in a single night.
500,000 lives gone.
And how does the central government in West Pakistan, the government that is supposed to protect these people, respond to this unimaginable tragedy?
With a chilling, inexcusable apathy, the military government in West Pakistan dragged its feet. The relief response was agonizingly slow, logistically incompetent, and demonstrated a profound, undeniable lack of empathy for the suffering of the Bengali citizens.
For the people of East Pakistan, wandering through the mud and mass graves of their families, the realization was absolute. The West did not value their lives.
The social contract was permanently broken. And then, right on the heels of this grief, just months later in late 1970, Pakistan holds its first democratic national elections.
The Bengali political party, the Awami League, was led by a highly charismatic, deeply beloved figure named Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
He ran on a platform demanding massive political and economic autonomy for East Pakistan. And the Awami League didn't just win locally. Because East Pakistan had a significantly larger population than the West, the Awami League won an absolute, undeniable majority of seats in the entire national parliament of Pakistan.
So by the basic mathematical laws of a democratic election, Sheikh Mujib should have packed his bags, flown to the capital, and immediately been sworn in as the prime minister of the entire country.
Yes, that is how democracy functions.
Right.
But the military generals and the political elite in West Pakistan absolutely refused to hand over the reins of power to a Bengali leader. They indefinitely postponed the convening of the parliament, effectively staging a soft coup against the democratic results.
If the government refuses to honor the vote, what options are left? The people of East Pakistan realized the entire system was rigged. Democracy was an illusion if it meant a Bengali could lead.
They realized they would never, ever be treated as co-equal citizens in a united Pakistan. The facade of a united nation completely shattered.
On March 7, 1971, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman stood before a sea of over 1 million people at the racecourse in Dhaka. He delivered an electrifying, iconic speech that effectively charted the course for the nation, ending with the immortal declaration. The struggle this time is a struggle for our emancipation. The struggle this time is a struggle for our independence.
The West Pakistani response to this Declaration of Independence was swift and horrifying. On the night of March 25, 1971, the Pakistani military launched a campaign called Operation Searchlight.
Operation Searchlight was a meticulously planned, deeply brutal military crackdown. The objective was to decapitate the Bengali nationalist movement overnight by systematically eliminating its political leadership and its intellectual core.
Under the cover of darkness, heavily armed military units assaulted Dhaka University, executing students in their dormitories and dragging professors from their homes. They targeted police barracks, intellectual neighborhoods, and Hindu communities with ruthless efficiency.
They arrested Sheikh Mujib and flew him to a heavily guarded prison in West Pakistan. But the military was too late to stop the momentum. Literally moments before his arrest, a final radio transmission was broadcast, officially declaring the sovereign, independent nation of Bangladesh.
What followed was a devastating 9-month-long war. The Pakistani military, functioning as a highly trained, well-equipped conventional force, unleashed a campaign of terror and systemic violence across the Delta. Millions of innocent Bengali civilians were internally displaced, their villages burned, their livelihoods destroyed.
But the Bengali people did not submit. Faced with an organized military machine, ordinary citizens, rice farmers, university students, factory workers, school teachers picked up whatever weapons they could find.
They retreated into the dense, muddy terrain of the Delta and formed a fierce guerrilla resistance army known as the Mukti Bahini, the Freedom Fighters.
The Mukti Bahini utilized their deep knowledge of the complex river systems to wage a highly effective asymmetric war, constantly harassing and bleeding the Pakistani supply lines.
But the humanitarian toll of the conflict was staggering. Over 10 million terrified Bengali refugees flooded across the border into neighboring India, desperately fleeing the violence.
Let's consider the geopolitics of that moment. India is suddenly facing an influx of 10 million desperate, starving refugees. No border economy on Earth can absorb that without entirely collapsing. India is effectively forced to act.
Precisely. India was completely overwhelmed by the logistical nightmare of the refugee crisis. Furthermore, as tensions escalated, the Pakistani military launched preemptive airstrikes against Indian air bases in the West.
This officially drew India into the conflict.
Yes. In late 1971, the Indian military entered the war in direct, organized support of the Bengali independence movement.
The highly trained Indian military teams up with the fiercely motivated Mukti Bahini guerrillas.
It was an overwhelming alliance. They launched a lightning-fast, highly coordinated military campaign that bypassed heavily fortified Pakistani defensive positions and drove straight for the capital of Dhaka. Within a matter of weeks, the Allied forces had completely encircled the Pakistani military command.
And on December 16, 1971, in front of roaring, jubilant crowds in Dhaka, the Pakistani military command signed the official document of unconditional surrender.
The bizarre geographical impossibility of a two-winged Pakistan was dead. East Pakistan was erased from the map.
And from the ashes, the blood, and the fierce defense of their mother tongue, the proud, independent nation of Bangladesh officially took its place on the global stage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you look back at this sequence of events, the profound irony is almost painful.
It really is.
The West Pakistani elite looked down on the Bengali people. They dismissed them as culturally inferior. In their political arrogance, they completely ignored the absolute biological reality we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
So what does this all mean? They ignored the literal DNA and the ancient history that proved a Punjabi general ordering strikes from Islamabad and a Bengali farmer fighting in the mud of Dhaka were rooted in the exact same soil.
They shared the exact same ASI foundation, the same Iranian farmer ancestors, the same steppe pastoralists.
It is a stark lesson in how modern national identities are truly forged. Bangladesh's identity was not simply handed to them by a shared religion. It was forged in the fire of defending their unique geography, fighting back against crushing economic exploitation, and above all, bleeding for the right to speak their own language.
It proves that while genetic genealogy and shared ancestral biology are scientific facts, they cannot override the immediate human realities of regional pride, cultural dignity, and political oppression.
We have covered an immense, staggering amount of history today.
We truly have. It's an epic saga.
We started tens of thousands of years ago, extracting the secrets of the indigenous AASI hunter-gatherers from the microscopic vaults of ancient skulls. We watched the Iranian farmers arrive and build the meticulously gridded, brick-paved, plumbing-equipped cities of the Indus Valley.
We explored how the brutal social rules of the ancient caste system locked human DNA into thousands of isolated vaults for 2 millennia.
We tasted the slow-cook, deeply spiced culinary fusions of the Mughal emperors, and we unspooled the open-source linguistic project of Urdu.
And finally, we witnessed the horrifyingly ignorant pen strokes of a British lawyer, strokes that fractured this ancient landscape into the heavily militarized realities of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
How would you summarize all this for our listeners?
Well, if I were to synthesize this massive, sweeping historical and genetic saga into a single framework, I would ask you to think of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh as 3 siblings.
3 siblings, okay.
They grew up in the exact same ancient, sprawling house. They share the exact same parents, the exact same cellular DNA, and thousands upon thousands of years of shared childhood memories. They learned to farm together, they wove the same magnificent textiles, they developed the mathematical concept of zero together, and they built breathtaking, world-altering empires side by side.
But
as they grew older, a deeply manipulative, calculating outsider entered their home. This outsider, looking to exploit their wealth, systematically sowed profound seeds of distrust, weaponizing their minor differences, and eventually forced a chaotic, incredibly violent separation.
And today, those 3 siblings live in 3 separate houses.
Exactly, surrounded by high concrete fences, barbed wire, security cameras, and a profound, lingering political paranoia.
But the truth, the absolute undeniable truth that modern science and archaeology have verified for us today, is written right there in the dirt. It is baked into the bricks, it is simmered into the biryani, and it is explicitly coded into their actual cellular DNA.
They are, and always have been, a single ancient family tree that simply grew into 3 magnificent, complex branches. That is the true, unfiltered story of the subcontinent.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final lingering thought to explore on your own.
Go for it.
When you look at the fierce, unyielding survival of the Bengali language, or when you realize that Urdu and Hindi continue to perfectly mirror each other in everyday, casual conversation across one of the most heavily fortified, hostile borders on planet Earth, it makes you wonder. Politicians and colonial administrators can draw all the solid black lines on a map they want. They can build walls, deploy armies, and rewrite textbooks. But ultimately, is the language we speak, the way we express our shared humanity, the one true thing that a border can never truly divide?
A phenomenal question to carry forward.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the history you think you know, keep looking past the neat lines on the map, and we will see you next time.